So what makes us happy at work, right? What gives us a sense of like job satisfaction or career satisfaction? Well, there's some pretty interesting research done on lawyers that applies to pretty much all of us that shows us what makes for this. And the model is called self-determination theory. So this is a psychological model that talks in terms of certain like psychological needs, almost like we have biological needs for food, water, sex, shelter. There are certain psychological needs that are most often met through work that explain a lot of what makes us happy or unhappy in a job or a career. So this video is based on a talk I gave last week for the Bar Association in Philadelphia, which is like the professional group for lawyers. And now this paper I thought was fascinating because it was literally titled, "What Makes Lawyers Happy?" So they specifically looked at that demographic and tried to figure out the work factors, personal factors, even demographic factors, and see which of these kind of specific things predicted how happy those people were and how happy they were also as kind of in the context of their careers. And importantly, the model that I started to learn about, this self-determination theory, is fairly universal. It's fairly well researched and shows that in, again, pretty much any context, right, not just lawyers, right, any context, some of these key pieces need to be in place for us to feel happy at work. So let's start with a little background on this specific study. So they looked at, I think it was several thousand lawyers and law students, and they tried to figure out like what actually predicted how happy people were. And when I say predicted, it would be kind of like you look at certain responses that people give and try to figure out like how well those are correlated with how happy they are. So here's the key insight that ties back to, like I said, this model of self-determination theory. So self-determination theory says a couple things. It says really that we all have needs for relatedness, which is basically like connection to other people, for competence, so we feel like we are capable and good at what we're doing and we're growing, and then autonomy, that we have some freedom to be authentic and kind of express ourselves as we want to and work in our own way. Like we're empowered to have some sense of control. So what they saw in this study is that pretty much like every other career, people tend to think, or they tend to value income and other things like career progression and status, right? So in the case of the lawyers, in law school, the things that people most emphasize are like, what are your earnings at the end? What is your class rank? Are you a member of this like prestigious journal review thing? And it turns out that those factors matter very, very little for how happy you are. And these other psychological factors that have to do with your actual experience of work, the sense of which you feel connected to others, the sense which you feel like autonomy and kind of empowered to work in your own way, and the sense to which you feel competent, as well as the sense to which your work is aligned with your intrinsic motivations, were roughly 3x or 300% more significant than these other things like money and status. And so really the bottom line is saying that if you really want to be satisfied in your job or in your career, it's not that money doesn't matter at all, right? This money in this study had a kind of small to medium significance. And especially if you're in a lower threshold of income, money has a fairly substantial impact on your quality of life because it helps to reduce stress, right? If you're literally like worried about your financial needs, you're not going to be very happy because you're going to be stressed. But once you're at a comfortable place, whatever that is for you, but maybe we say around 6 figures or something where you don't really have to worry, there's not as much of an impact on the money piece. But these other factors matter fairly significantly. And so my invitation for you is to consider, maybe as you're making career decisions or job decisions, you want to keep in mind really 4 things. So the first 3, remember I said, were this idea of connectedness or relatedness. Then you have autonomy, and then we have competence. The 4th one that in this study was fairly relevant as well is intrinsic motivation, which means, are you doing the work because you enjoy it, because you find it interesting, or because it's aligned with a core value of yours, something that inspires you? Or are you doing it for prestige or for money or for career progression? So I would encourage you to think about those 4 things and prioritize those as you make decisions about your job or your career. And maybe if you're not in a position to swap careers or swap jobs or whatever, there still may be a few things you can do to improve your experience at work by leveraging this model of self-determination theory. And it's really just looking at each of those things, relatedness first and connection. What could you do to build some more meaningful relationships at work? There's an interesting study, or a data set, I should say, from Gallup, which is one of the biggest employee and employer research companies, that says that people who say yes to the question, do you have a best friend at work, are 7 times more engaged. And engaged, or employee engagement, is a measure of interest and enthusiasm and commitment to one's work. So you can imagine just having a one best friend at work makes you way more engaged and interested and kind of excited to do that work, to show up there. So if you're not super happy or content, consider ways to deepen your relationships and your sense of connection at work. The next one, autonomy. And this may require you having a conversation with your supervisor or manager or whoever you report to or the people around you, but just saying, to what extent could you sort of be responsible for objectives more than the how of how you get the objectives? So what I mean is, right, maybe if you're managing some project, it's like, hey, we know that every week, here are the 3 things we need to get done, and here's what you're responsible for. But it's like, if you want to work an extra couple hours on Thursday to take a couple hours off on Friday, you can do that. Or if you say, hey, here's all the things our team has to do for this project. I really enjoy the planning piece, but I'm not so good at the writing client communications piece. Could I do a little more of this and a little less of that, right? Just trying to give yourself a little bit leeway and communicate so that you're set up to have more of this autonomy, right? That you're not micromanaged. You have a little bit of flexibility and freedom to do the work that you want to do. Or maybe I should say that you're good at doing, right? That's kind of aligned with authentically what you like to do to the extent possible. Okay. So then the final one is competence, which just means recognizing the progress that you have made and recognizing when you're growing and when you're getting better. So be sure to invest in your own personal development. So that's learning, doing trainings, making sure your company is supporting you in that way. But also, it could just be as simple as making a done list. This is something I like to do at the end of each week to actually kind of cognitively reflect on my accomplishments. And I every week I do it. I'm like, what the heck did I do this week? And then I look at all these things and I'm like, oh, you're pretty good. So that's a little tool you might deploy as well. And of course, if you're a leader, you want to think about relatedness, autonomy, and competence for your people or for your team. And then the last piece is just to reflect on your intrinsic motivations, right? What do you enjoy doing? What interests you? And what values are important to you? Literally write those out so that they're top of mind. And then you can think about, how could I get more of that in my job or in my career? So my hope is that this video on the psychological model of self-determination theory, which is fairly well grounded in the research literature, and of course there's a specific study for this one on lawyers that applies to many different contexts, which the references are down below. I hope this helps you to be happier and more satisfied in work, and especially if you're a leader, to help you create more happiness at work for your people and for your teams. So thanks for watching. Here's a video that YouTube suggests you'll like. And as always on this channel, you can find practical tools and insights on the art and science of happiness to help you in both your work and life. So I'll see you next time.